This is Volatile Curtis Wylde, and you are listening to Interactive Wrestling Radio.
You're listening to Interactive Wrestling Radio, featuring the interactive interview, courtesy of WrestlingEpicenter.com.
Gobble gobble, son, like a turkey do. All right, everybody, happy Thanksgiving right here at WrestlingEpicenter.com. It is James Walsh, your humble host, doing a terrible, terrible Teen Titans Go turkey impression, as well as a off, and I can do it better than that, but an off Michelangelo impression from the 2012 edition of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Enough me nerding out. Let's nerd out on wrestling, shall we? So today we have two interviews for you this Thanksgiving weekend, and they are going to be with Southern Illinois Championship Wrestling star Curtis Wylde, who's just an interesting character. I think you guys are going to enjoy this one, as well as Ring of Honor main television announcer Ian Riccaboni. Two interviews to be feasting on this Thanksgiving weekend. Hope you guys enjoy them, and thank you again for checking out WrestlingEpicenter.com. Enjoy.
This is former WWE superstar Al Snow, and you're listening to Interactive Wrestling Radio.
Throw some metal, show a little skin, looking for some trouble if she can get in. Come with me, I know where to go, I know what you like, I know how you want it. Give it the gate, to turn up the master. She wants more, give it the master.
Let me talk to you, dummies. It's Eli Drake, and you're listening to Interactive Wrestling Radio.
Welcome back to Interactive Wrestling Radio. On the Newsmaker line with me right now is a gentleman who contacted me. I think he probably heard about me through Cult of Kayfabe, if I was to take a guess. But we've been around a while, so we'll take it as a compliment. One of the first guys who ever actually asked me to do an interview, and I'm so glad to have him. The one and only Curtis Wylde from the Illinois area. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing good. I'm doing better than most people, which is how I usually do.
That's the way that I would like it to be. All right. So I got to tell you, I looked you up. I read up on you. You're an interesting character. You might be one of the few guys who remind me of Diamond Dallas Page in that you are out there doing your own promotion and you really are making a name for yourself, and you're doing it by pounding the pavement. So I appreciate that, man. You're really working hard.
Well, absolutely. But I'm not getting the job done because next time you're going to need to contact me. See how that works?
Yeah, well, you're always welcome on, man. I appreciate it. I looked you up, and I'm impressed with what I've seen. I watched some YouTube, and, man, anyway. So let's talk a little bit about things. You're involved in politics, one of my many facets. You're also involved in one thing that we certainly can agree on, and that is professional wrestling. I wanted to ask you, what made you get involved in this crazy, wacky world of professional wrestling?
Well, professional wrestling got me involved. I mean, it did all that it could do to bite me with the wrestling bug, and that happened when I was about 5, 6 years old. Watching world-class championship wrestling and old WWF and reruns of Wrestling at the Chase, and we caught all kinds of wrestling in the St. Louis area. So my first wrestling match was with a pillow in my grandmother's living room when I was probably 5 years old.
Who won?
I did, of course.
There you go.
Because not only was I wrestling, but I was handling the booking. I was a man of many hats. I was also the referee, so I paid myself off, and I did my own entrance music and interviews.
So you did the whole 9 yards. You went all the way out for this thing.
Absolutely. Had my own shows in my grandmother's living room. It was crazy.
You know, it's
Off
funny
the
you're
top
from
rope
Illinois.
and off of the coffee table.
Off of the that's right. I did the same thing. One thing I found though is when they did those wrestling buddies that the legs were too short. So you'll appreciate this being an Illinois guy. They did Major League Baseball did a version of the wrestling buddies, but obviously baseball buddies, and they had longer legs, so you can actually really throw them around, and they were more realistic. So many years of my childhood was spent beating up a Ryan Sandberg stuffed toy.
Perfect. You couldn't have picked a better one, right?
There you go. All right. Well, here we are.
But yeah,
we're talking.
I mean, those wrestling buddies were one of the staples of my childhood, as you can imagine. But really, I kind of sidelined the wrestling buddies early and started using my friends as wrestling buddies.
There you go. And where did you actually train to wrestle?
Powerhouse Championship Wrestling. It was up in Spring Valley, Illinois, and it was about a 4-hour drive from us, but it was definitely worth it. And it was more of a drill, kind of a drill instructor type camp, where instead of being handled with kid gloves, as a lot of the kids are today, if you messed up something, not only did you get your trainer right up in your face, yelling at the top of his lungs and spitting at you, but you had to do it over and over and over again until you got it right. So it was definitely like a boot camp.
That's absolutely right. All right, so
it was a good time. It was Mr. Intensity Brian Dean. He was actually fairly big just before that out in the Las Vegas area, so you may have been aware of him.
Absolutely, I am. Yeah, yes, sir. So your name, I got to ask you, I'm joking around a little bit when I say this. There was a wrestling valet who went by Brandy Wylde. You might have known her as Tylene Buck. There's a guitarist named Zach Wylde. But what inspired the Wylde side, the Wild Child name?
Well, funny enough, it didn't have anything to do with either of them. I was looking for a character that was somewhat like Wolverine, and that was more up my alley. It was more what I look like physically in the face. I look more like a rabbit type character, more animalistic than Pretty Boy. And the first name that I adopted was Wild Child, based on the Marvel character.
Oh, okay.
Of the same name. Which was like a little Wolverine. And I don't know if he was ever introduced as Wolverine's son or not, but he definitely could have pulled it off.
I think you're right, yeah.
So the Wild Child came from that, and then I evolved into the Innovator of Impact Wild Child because Tommy Dreamer had the Innovator of Offense, or the Innovator of... what was it?
Innovator of Violence.
Innovator of Violence. That's right. Innovator of Violence. And then you had Canyon. He was the Innovator of Offense.
Yep, there you go.
So I was the Innovator of Impact.
That's awesome.
Wild Child.
Excellent.
And then the name evolved from that.
Yep, you're now Curtis.
Into Curtis Wylde.
Curtis Wylde, yeah. Very cool.
And how that happened was really out of necessity, because I got too many gray hairs to call myself Child.
Oh, man. That's true.
So, and now I'm Volatile Curtis Wylde, because the first organization that I used the name in was Gateway Championship Wrestling, based out of St. Louis. And it was a perfect tagline, VCW is GCW.
Oh, that's perfect. That absolutely fits right in. So... you mentioned St. Louis wrestling. You mentioned wrestling at the Chase. I think a lot of us who are our age, I'm assuming you're probably around my age, have fond memories of wrestling at the Chase. And I told you offline, and I'll tell you now, our sportscaster jokingly always says, let's see what happened at the Chase. Talking about Chase Field, I'm out in Arizona, but it kind of brings a smile to my face because I'm a wrestling dork, and I think, oh, it reminds me of wrestling at the Chase. I guess, how cool is it that you're involved in a promotion that has lineage, that has its roots in wrestling at the Chase?
Man, that's one of the coolest parts about wrestling now in my career is that when I first came in, I never had an idea to go to WWF or WCW. Those weren't my goals. My goal, number one, would have been to go to USWA or a territory in the Memphis area and wrestle there, wrestle that style in front of those people. And when that kind of fizzled out, or I moved away from the area, because I've lived in many hotbeds for professional wrestling.
Right.
So I moved out of the Memphis area. ECW was kind of my goal. I wanted to go to ECW, but just kind of out of necessity because that old school wrestling had went away.
Right.
And then when I came back to the St. Louis area, I found out that old school wrestling was alive and well still. And it was alive and well in the next evolution of Wrestling at the Chase, which is ran by Larry Matisick and Herb Simmons, the right hand and the left hand of Sam Munchnick, who also ran Wrestling at the Chase. So those are the guys that run Southern Illinois Championship Wrestling.
SICW, that's right. And you mentioned Larry Matisick. Obviously, if those who hear that name know who he is, he was the announcer for Wrestling at the Chase on a lot of those shows that they re-aired on the Wrestling Channel just a number of years ago. How's he doing?
He's doing good. He's doing good. He's getting up there in years, and he's got his ups and downs, but he was just at our show last Saturday, and he came into the locker room on his motorized wheelchair, and he's still just as determined and fiery as ever, and he's still got a great mind for the business, and he still directs the show, so to speak.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And Herb Simmons does a great job promoting and getting people there and putting butts in the seats. Most shows are near sellouts. Some shows are sellouts, and Herb Simmons is very much to thank for that. But Herb can't discount athletes the caliber of Curtis Wylde. He can't discount that he's got on his show the Lion of the Lou, the Wolf of West County, and the Spark of Forest Park, none other than the king of SICW, Curtis Wylde.
There you go. All right, so you guys have a major show coming up here on December the 9th. That's the reason you're out there doing interviews and talking about it. What is going to happen at this major event?
Well, I mean, there's always a huge event in December. The SICW has two major events of the year. In May, they've got the Bruiser Brody Memorial Battle Royal, throwing back to Bruiser Brody. And a lot of times we've got Bruiser Brody's widow in the house, Barbara Goodish. Last May, we had Abdullah the Butcher in the house. The year before that, Stan Hansen. So it always kind of revolves around Brody, and that's in May. But the December show is when a lot of the feuds of the year kind of come to a boiling point. And that is more of the May show is our Royal Rumble. The December show is our WrestleMania.
There you go.
And I happen to be in the main event for the Classic Heavyweight Championship, the SICW Classic Championship.
And who are we going to be facing?
That's going to be Iron Man Ken Casa. I believe he is a three-time SICW Classic Champion, and he just went 60 minutes with the Icon, Chris Hargis. A couple of those names you may be familiar with.
I'm familiar with a lot of this. Yes, sir.
Absolutely. And, fresh off of that, I was feuding with Unstable Dave Vaughn, and it just so happened that a year apart from Ken Casa and my last match is when we are going to have another match, and this time the strap's on the line, SICW Classic Championship.
Excellent. So I've been surfing YouTube, keeping up on what you're up to, and I do see that even on your website, you're promoting Wildfire, who is a female performer. Wanted to get your what is the story of Wildfire?
She is my baby doll. She is my Miss Elizabeth. She is my number one ginger that makes sure that she always watches her investment, always watches my back, and makes sure to keep me on the winning track. And she also happens to be my main squeeze, my number one lady, and my wife.
You did good, my friend. All right. Well,
she is definitely a feather in my cap. She does what I need her to do at ringside. She does what I need her to do in every other aspect. And Wildfire is definitely something that keeps the wild side on track, makes sure that I stay exactly where I need to be, which is at the top of the mountain in SICW.
all right. So what is your take on women in wrestling in these days? Because there's been a lot of talk. In fact, I just watched Raw with my kids. Have to watch it on DVR and fast forward because it's just, you can't sit through that. I'm sorry, but it's a hard thing to sit through. So there's a heavy focus on the women. What is your take on the changing dynamic in wrestling, and what do you attribute it to?
I think that's another evolution. I think that back in the day we had women wrestlers, you know, the Leilani Kais and Fabulous Moolahs, and Wendy Richters, of course. And then you got to a point where it was a lot of eye candy. And I think that somewhere in there came the likes of Lita, Trish Stratus, women who could actually wrestle, but they try to put them in pillow fights and things of that sort, which is probably what their fan base wanted to see at that time. But after they went G-rated, the women had to either deliver or they didn't get featured. And so they learned to deliver, and they turned into great wrestlers. And now, as you've seen with the Diva Revolution, or Women's Wrestling Revolution, whatever they're calling it, they're now really good wrestlers that can main event shows. So they've proven themselves and earned their spot, and they're due nothing but respect, man.
Very cool. So you mentioned USWA, you mentioned World Class, you mentioned ECW, all this stuff. I mean, if I took back all the time I've spent watching that, I'd probably be 10 years younger. But you mentioned all these companies. They're not around right now. But what is around, we got Impact Wrestling, you got Ring of Honor, you got, of course, WWE still and probably always will be on top. What is your take on the current wrestling scene? And do you agree with what a lot of our guests recently have said? That is that if you're looking for something outside of WWE, you're really doing the right thing right now because there's so much to choose from.
Well, I mean, WWE has a lot to choose from themselves with the WWE Network, with the NXT shows and 205 Live and all that. So they're trying to have more of a smorgasbord of offerings for their fan base. But people are absolutely right. Like, if you want an alternative to WWE, you can absolutely find one. Not only for the fans, but for the wrestlers. You can find an alternative that you can make a decent income wrestling. So WWE is not the only show in town anymore. And you see these guys doing that. You see guys like Cody Rhodes, who says that he's making more now outside of WWE than he was in WWE. And that's kind of the path that people are taking. Look at the Young Bucks. You know, and then you've got other talents that get in the machine and realize that they're unhappy in that machine, in that environment. Like Matt Sydal, like Jimmy Jacobs, you know?
Yeah, look what they just did. They both walked out. Sammy Callahan was our last guest, and he did the same thing. He was unhappy. He walked out, and he's doing great for himself.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And it's always a case of the cream will rise. But now the cream has different places to rise, and that's important. That's an important distinction, because as I was coming up, my thought was that the opportunity had passed me by because I never wanted to be a WWE guy. I wanted to be a territory guy. I wanted to be part of the old school territories, and those were dead.
Yes.
When I was coming in, so I see that people are kind of creating their own territories, and I really dig that. You got the Monster Factory up there with Danny Cage in the Northeast, and then you've got House of Hardcore with Tommy Dreamer,
right?
And then out west, you've got organizations where guys can go and make a living.
Right, absolutely. We got one here. We're kind of joined at the hip with Championship Wrestling from Hollywood as part of the United Wrestling Network. We got Championship Wrestling from Arizona, which is very cool, and it kind of snuck its way onto local TV. Very cool, because it kind of has that old school feel to it. So it's a good time. It's a good time to be a wrestling fan. Where does SICW fit into that?
Well, they're probably one of the premier organizations in the Midwest, but you're not going to hear that if you talk to guys who are primarily looking to the internet for their reviews. So the internet wrestling community and that fan base, and even some of those wrestlers that are trying to market themselves to that community, may not think that SICW is what it is, but they don't have guys like Ricky the Dragon Steamboat in the locker room giving free seminars either.
Exactly. You're absolutely right.
You know, they don't have the experience in their locker rooms that we have. So there's definitely something to be said for the less is more, smarter not harder concept that it took me a long time to get. And it wasn't until I got to SICW that I really got it.
Very cool.
And I think that SICW is coming along on their social presence, but really where they shine is at the live shows, the fans, because they draw those fans that it's still real to them, damn it.
Yep. All right. So a couple quick things, then we'll let you off the phone. But I wanted to ask you about something Josh Matthews said. Josh Matthews, the Impact announcer, he does a lot of stuff behind the scenes. He mentioned that the Global Wrestling Network will be showing some classic, guess what, Wrestling at the Chase footage on their shows down the road. And their goal, obviously, is to try and present a lot of those premier companies like SICW down the line as well. If they're going to air anything like Classic Championship, Wrestling at the Chase, do you guys think that maybe that might be an outlet so you guys can reach a broader audience?
Well, I've seen what the WWN Network has been doing for since their inception, and I like their plan. I think when I first looked at it, it was you get the network and then you had to buy each channel separately. Is it still like that?
This is the Global Wrestling Network. It's kind of Impact's deal.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, then I'm not too keen on what's going on with that. But I can only imagine if there's more outlets for wrestling, that there's going to be more opportunities for wrestling organizations such as SICW to get on it. I know that we're broadcast on the Fight TV app.
Excellent.
But to be honest with you, I haven't seen the shows on there. I watch it on YouTube, or if I'm ever able to catch it on TV, I check it out there. But for the most part, I don't really seek out too much wrestling at this point. And the wrestling that I do seek out isn't new wrestling.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Just because things that they did 30, 40 years ago that you haven't seen for 30 or 40 years are brand new. So that's my study material.
I'll tell you the truth, and I'm telling you the honest to God's truth. There's some times that I have to, and one of the things about doing what I do is I got to watch everything. And there's some times when we hit maybe we hit a bad week, and we have things on there, and I go, why am I watching this stuff? This doesn't do anything for me. What I do is I go back in and I watch Hogan Andre, or I watch something from Memphis from like '88, or I go back and watch anything that's, maybe 30 years old, but still kind of makes my creative juices and kind of excites me. And that's what keeps me doing this, because that stuff still is out there to be seen. So I totally understand where you're coming from.
Absolutely. And, come to think of it, now that you said it that way and brought it up, they had the NXT War Games recently.
Yes, sir.
Well, I haven't seen the NXT War Games yet, but yesterday I watched the very first War Games.
Oh, there you go. Very cool. Very cool.
So I completely get where you're coming from with that. You got to kind of detox from the current product and go back to what you learned to love to begin with.
Exactly. All right. So I know you said you didn't want to talk much about politics, and I promise you we're not going to be combative. You and I think we have a lot of common ground here. I did want to ask you, though, what is it about wrestling? Because we've seen guys like Rhino. We've seen recently Matt Morgan. We've seen quite a few different guys get involved in politics. Obviously, Jesse Ventura kind of tore the roof off of everything when he became governor and shocked the world. But what is the attraction? How does wrestling kind of coincide with politics?
Well, when you first hear that a wrestler is running for office, most people in the political circle are going to snicker. They're going to think that it's funny. But they don't realize how well pro wrestling prepares you for a political life or a run for a political office. Because, one, I've dealt with more politics in professional wrestling than I ever have in the political arena.
I believe you.
And two, we're taught, and not enough guys are taught this, but you're your own brand. You're your own marketing. You're your own advertisement. You have to do those things yourself because nobody's going to do it for you. You have to build your brand. And learning how to do that for pro wrestling, it's not hard to translate it to other fields because we're shameless self-promoters. If you're any good at this business, you're a shameless self-promoter. And some people will try to tell you that you're ego-driven or you've got a big ego. But nobody's going to do this stuff for you.
Right.
Nobody's going to reach out to Wrestling Epicenter and say, hey, do you want to interview Curtis Wylde? Curtis Wylde's going to say, hey, do you want to have some words about the show that I'm doing on December 9th?
Yeah.
And that's the way that it gets done. You have to want it bad enough.
Absolutely.
So,
I compared you to Diamond Dallas Page in that regard, and some people might hear that and they might think one thing or another thing, but I tell you what, Diamond Dallas Page is a guy who I have the utmost respect for because say what you want about who his neighbor was and all that other stuff, but here's a guy who did it all himself just by hard work, and that's my honest opinion, and that's kind of what you're doing. So, again, like I said, I appreciate that. Final question for you. December 9th, big show. Did you want to have a final plug for that?
Absolutely. December 9th in East Carondelet, Illinois. The doors open at 6. Bell time is at 7. And for the first time ever, the main event at Southern Illinois Championship Wrestling, their premier show of the year, will be Iron Man Ken Casa, the SICW Classic Champion, against Volatile Curtis Wylde, the marquee player, the one-man show business machine. The Wild Man Express is going to be across the ring from him. And when he looks in my eyes and when he steps on through to the wild side, I'm going to walk out of that ring the SICW Classic Champion because that's wild.
Awesome. I did say that was the last question. There's one thing I forgot to mention during our talk. A guy I interviewed probably just 3 months ago or so. I remember it was during ironically enough, Illinois ties. It was between the Diamondbacks and the Cubs. It was a rain delay. And while there was a rain delay on my TV, I sat down and interviewed Al Snow. And you mentioned that you guys are going to be doing some cross promotion with Al Snow's T-shirt brand, which is Collar and Elbow. What's going on with that?
Well, we are actually sponsored athletes. We are the first wrestler valet combination who has ever been sponsored athletes through Collar and Elbow, which is Al Snow's apparel and shirt company. It's that wrestling brand. And if your listeners go to collarandelbow.com and they buy any shirts, use the code name Wylde, that's WYLDE. They'll get 10% off, and I get a little kickback. So that's how that works. Al Snow is really appreciative of people who are trying to build his brand, and we're really appreciative to be associated with Al Snow because it's a big-time company. And as I said in a promo not too long ago, affliction, step aside. Tap out, beat your heart out. Because Collar and Elbow is the new brand in professional sports.
Excellent. All right, we're looking forward to see how everything turns out on December the 9th. I'll be sure and post the results as soon as I get them. And one last favor from you. Do you mind just giving me a station ID saying this is Curtis Wylde and you're listening to Interactive Wrestling Radio?
You got it.
All right, do you want me to count you
This
down
is
like Wayne's World?
Volatile. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I need to learn to shut up. I was going to ask, did you want me to count you down like Wayne's World? But you got it, I think.
This is Volatile Curtis Wylde, and you are listening to Interactive Wrestling Radio with your host, James.
You nailed it, man. First
I can
take,
throw you
and you got
another
it.
one. I can throw you another one if you want, man.
Sure. What do you got?
It was Interactive Wrestling Radio.
That's us, yes, sir.
Okay, and I missed your last name. That's what I kind of glubbed on there.
Walsh, W-A-L-S-H.
Walsh. Got it. All right, I'll throw you another one. Ready?
Yes, sir.
This is Volatile Curtis Wylde, and you are listening to Interactive Wrestling Radio with your host, John Walsh.
The Wrestling Epicenter has been around since 2002, and in that time, all these guests, everybody pictured, has been on our podcast. We're more than just a radio show, though, so check out WrestlingEpicenter.com for all your wrestling news and needs.